You don't want to hear my idea for your soundbite or your jingle?
Oh, sure. I mean, you got something, bring it. Yes,
Right. It's a toss-up between nana 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 BlatzChatz. That's my number one. My number two is Jay Blatz got her own podcast. Blatz. You like it? Which one? Which one of those do you want? I mean, they're both my IP, but I'm giving them to you. You can have them both to use, but whichever one you want, I'll help you work on it.
Just hearing that jingle, it still makes me laugh to this day. Anyway, on my first year at YouTube, I thought I would revisit some of my favorite interview moments. And we might as well keep with Thomas Wilson, where he talks about how some UX industry veterans are actually sending messages that are harmful to the UX industry. Let's check it out.
So, talking about some of those Deming principles, right? We've lost sight of those.
Oh yeah.
Why? Let's talk about quality specifically. Why do you think the shift of focus is away from quality and all these other factors?
Well, this part's going to sting for some people. What I've kind of come to the conclusion is there's a bunch of people online who fall into this category. They are 100% not employable by any organization. They would never be hired. They are pretty much retired. If you look at who they are, the last time they were in the game was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Some of them have never even been inside of a large organization as a change maker like you or I. They've never seen the effects of the goofy things that they're saying. And they've never endured the disrespect and these environments of low psychological safety and very low intellectual honesty, right? So you're promoting all of these people. What you did is you told the world that all they needed was 1/3 of the three-legged stool in the form of design, and that's the only design you need. You don't need a researcher. You just need a production monkey. You need someone to go into Figma and create buttons for you at your behest and design what you want them to design, okay? Because you said that that's what you wanted, all of a sudden, all these boot camps rose up to meet that need. In the last 10 years, they just blew up, and the reason why they blew up is you told the business what they wanted to hear, not what was right or true or best for the customer or user. You told them what they wanted to hear, which was design is wacky, research takes too long, screw all these researchers who think they need 3-6 months to do some discovery. So, but we just need to build stuff and test it on people. We're going to go live with it. We're going to push it live, and we're just going to test it out in the wild. Yeah, yeah. Was that Bill O'Reilly that had that video?
Fuck it, let's do it live.
That's exactly what business and PMs have become. They've become goofy ass Bill O'Reilly. It's just ridiculous. And the thing is that right there has been a huge problem. My wife and I just watched this show. It's a few years old, but it was called, I think, Dark Water or something like that with Mark Ruffalo. And it's about the Teflon scam. It was about how DuPont was making Teflon and they were just belching the filth into the water, into the local water table. They paid this old guy because he had a giant farm up there. So they dug up all this toxic waste from making Teflon and they buried it on his property, and it killed him. It killed him and his wife. It killed all these animals. And it was just amazing. It's a true story. You should watch it. It's amazing. But never before in history have we had this level of harm that seems to just be like the Purdue and the McKinsey thing with the OxyContin and all of these types of things. 800 cars, 900 cars blown up and caught fire. If that were anything else at any other time, you'd have watchdog groups come in. Somebody would stop that stuff, but it isn't being stopped because what we're telling everyone is it's okay to put profit over people's lives.
Sounds like it's a little bit of gaslighting.
There's a lot of that. There's a whole lot of that going on. And if you stand up and if you stand in the gap between a business doing harm and the customer user, you are going to be labeled a rabble rouser. You're going to be labeled someone who's a problem, and you're going to be on your way out, especially when there's multiple rounds of layoffs. This is when they cull all the potential whistleblowers with the good boys and girls. You know, they're like, okay, we got a Boy Scout over here on team X. We need to get rid of this guy. he's talking about people's feelings and doing right by them and stuff. I don't know what all this empathy shit is, but we need to get rid of it post haste because it doesn't sound like profit.
Thomas doesn't beat around the bush, does he? That's what we love about him. Anyway, let's move on with Maigen Thomas, where she talks about the good, the bad, and the ugly of UX boot camps.
So, Maigen, I like to start off with a broad question. And hey, what's on your mind these days?
What is on my mind these days has honestly been something that's in the collective consciousness. Are these boot camps scams, or are they legitimately helping people get jobs, skill up, and become these valued members of our technological society? Or are they just selling the American dream as a potential, maybe you could have this, and just taking people's money? That's been on my mind a lot lately.
Yeah, let's unpack that a little bit.
Yeah. So something that I saw recently, and I actually posted it to my LinkedIn, it was a Reddit post by a design director. So they didn't really identify who they are and what industry they're in, just that they are a UX manager and they were looking to hire a junior designer so that they could help them skill up and come along. And they opened up a job on LinkedIn and got over 500 applicants in less than a week. And they were thinking, cool, I have so many options with all of these early career designers. I'm going to crack knuckles. I'm going to get in there and be really excited about separating the wheat from the chaff, if you will. And it turns out there's unfortunately a lot of chaff. And as a former bootcamp instructor, that's normal. There are a lot of folks who take the idea and don't necessarily put in the time and effort to actually bring it to real fruition. I always say that in my classes, if I had an average of 30 students, somewhere between 1 and 3 would be stellar. Not only do you get it when I share A and B, but you take C and D, and then you ask questions that lead you down the road to E and F, like really go-getter, maybe have a little bit of context from previous experiences, maybe don't have, a design degree or anything like that, but they get it, they clip in. And then there's a lot of folks who are on the bell curve. They've got some experience, or they've at least got some aptitude towards things, and they're willing to do the work. And that's probably another 70%. So if that top percent is 5, then we've got some 75. And then we've got the bottom of the barrel. And this is really consistent across different cohorts. I've talked to people at multiple boot camps. I've talked to people who teach through the 2U, which is now edX. They're partnered with a ton of colleges and universities across the US and Canada. And yeah, there's just some people who show up thinking, they told me that I could do this, get a certificate, and get a $100,000 a year job. And that's what I'm going to do. And they just refuse to do anything more than the bare minimum effort. And they don't participate in group projects. They're not communicative. I had one person who was combative to say, I just don't understand the point of this design research. And my poor face is like, I'm sorry, what? I maybe misunderstood you, because there's no way you just looked in my face on a one-on-one video call and said you don't see the point of the boot camp you just paid $15,000 to be a part of. So your mileage may vary, but I think there's a lot of people who came in very well-intentioned and hoped to do the work and really hoped to change their lives. These people are looking for family-sustaining wages, not I work a day job for 8 hours and then I do gig work on the side in order to just barely make the minimum of what I need to accomplish to feed my kids and cover my bills. I'm finding there's a lot of examples of where maybe there's some unethical, maybe not illegal, but definitely immoral and unethical in my book for how you've gotten people roped in and then just don't give them their money back. What I'm hoping I don't find, but I'm interested to know, and this is why it's been on my mind and I've been digging into it so much, is I'm wondering if there are financial crimes involved, perhaps with aligning with or funneling people towards credit, scholarships, not scholarships, what am I thinking of? Loans to take on this new challenge of upskilling and career changing. And maybe they might be making money from sending those students that direction. And if so, I would be very interested in finding out if we've got some things going on that are not on the up and up. So no accusations, no expectations, but it sure does seem that there's a lot of people who are not getting what they paid for, or at least are not perceiving that they're getting what they paid for.
Yeah, and that's just one aspect, Maigen, the financial side of things, right?
Yeah.
what about the lack of delivery on a promise? Not just a promise to get a job
Yeah.
is a
But
promise.
through education.
Right. But the promise that you're going to know what you need to know after this boot camp.
I do feel bad for people who take that particular statement at face value, because really and truly, it does take, in UX, it takes a lot of curiosity and willingness to go beyond, here's the amount of information I was given. So I'm thinking of a paragraph or a sheet of information, and then kind of thinking outside of the box. What are the additional questions that I have that has not been provided to me in this? And this is very interesting because it kind of does tie into an couple of years old article by Debbie Levitt about, are you a type A designer or a type B designer? And a type A, I might get these transposed, but one of them is a production designer. I'm an order taker. I do the tasks, I deliver my work, and I don't really have questions. I don't really challenge who's answering or giving me these tasks to do. And I don't really use any critical thinking as part of my design process. And then there's the other hand, which is I am the critical thinker. I am considering the whole customer experience from when they are first introduced to the brand to when they close their account and everything in between and what all ties together. And that is so far beyond what is possible to be taught in a 6-year or 6-month boot camp that it's almost laughable for someone to be, yeah, this is absolutely everything I need.
Right.
Especially as I wrote a curriculum for 2U. So I was a instructor, and I was the hand raiser quite a few times to say, hey, this is outdated, or hey, there's a better way we can do this, or maybe there's a different technology we can use, because Envision is very difficult. And not to beat a dead horse literally, but yeah, Envision didn't do themselves any favors in that sense. But I wrote curriculum that had to be edited and re-edited because I am a very wordy person. I want to give as much information as possible, and it's limited. What we got pushback from with the editors and the learning designers was they're not going to read this much text. They're not that interested in learning the details. Oh, okay. Got to recalibrate my brain with that association. So there was a ton of information I would have loved to have taught, but there's just no way it could have been crammed into a 6-month experience. And there's what will the market bear in terms of a product? And apparently a 9 or 12-month boot camp was just never going to sell.
Right. Because you wanted to include all that additional context.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And this is why one of the main reasons that I ended up deciding I'm going to build an apprenticeship agency, because I see that there are thousands of students out here now who have either completed a boot camp or in the process of completing a boot camp, and they're just not prepared to be hired. It's not that they're not worth being hired. It's that they cannot perform in a way that hiring managers really need people to do, especially when we have industries that move so quickly. We are currently dealing with generative AI products in literally every technical product I can think of, and many that don't need an AI feature. These students coming out of boot camp, they've never handed off work to an actual developer. They've simulated it. They've never done it. They've never worked with an actual product manager or project manager, product owner. They don't really know the difference between those roles. They don't truly understand how to do research. They know how to follow some instructions, but if you handed them a new project and said, Greenfield, what do you want to research? They'd revert back to whatever it is that they came up with for their first project, because they've never experienced being able to truly flex that muscle.
Sure. Do you find that these boot camps are, shall I say, catering toward that order taker? They're telling them what to do rather than having the students exercise that critical thinking and decide, hey, I need to do research in this way for this thing? Or are they rather saying, you need to do this, check this box as far as the research goes?
I'm going to nod my head so hard for yes, it's an order taker, especially, and I hate saying this, but especially around UX research. And I'm sure you see so much of this. People who I am assuming reach out to you all the time for help to say, hi, I wanted to do this research. And you're like, this is the same question I saw the last 3 people who asked me this question asked on their interview questions. And that's not meaningful. So what I think is required is for them to learn how to think more critically and have their ideas and their questions challenged. And that is, again, not typically found in a boot camp scenario. One of my friends, Ryan Davidson, he's in the gaming industry. He's not a UX designer. He's a product manager or product owner. And he had students in the UX UI bootcamp at UC Davis that would actually challenge him or get angry. They would leave snarky feedback to say, I don't appreciate being asked, what do you think? I'm not here to think. I'm here for you to tell me stuff. Are you hearing yourself right now? So yeah, unfortunately, there is not really an expectation from everybody coming into the boot camp that they are going to be challenged intellectually and need to think critically in order to solve problems. So what I do know, based on what I've seen for those boot camps that I taught for and that I wrote for, is that the application process and the assessment, the skills assessment, is not, in fact, an application process. It's a sales process. And not to totally crap on boot camps, but like higher education does this too. Stanford, their freshman class is some insane number of people. Does that same number of people reach the senior class? No. And not everybody is dropping out to found their own business, their own startup. They are, in fact, just not escalating through the process the way it is intended, or they're not enjoying it, but they are being challenged in order to reach that higher level of education. And we don't have those kind of guardrails on boot camps. I say we, but I don't teach for boot camps anymore. I do not see those types of guardrails to ensure that there is actually going to be a successful outcome at the end of committing $5,000 to $10,000 to $15,000 and 6 months of your time.
Sure, that makes sense. So one more question about boot camps, Megan. Do you feel like they've changed from 5-10 years ago to now to meet the changing demands?
I think some of them have evolved. Yes. I am not certain. Okay, let me also choose my words carefully here, because I don't want to make people feel like this is not a viable career option. I need you to know that I went to a boot camp 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago. I went to a coding boot camp. We learned full stack development, and I immediately went out and got a job as a front-end developer and became a UX designer through on-the-job training I just was in a really great startup and had the opportunity to learn, and someone who cared enough to help me learn. And I wouldn't say that their curriculum has stayed the same. In fact, I know that they evolved that curriculum. That was Epicodus here in Portland, and they have actually recently closed. And as much as I'm sad to see them go, I think they also recognize we're not trying to take money from people who are not going to find a successful outcome. We have helped as many people as possible, but there's a cost balance of whether or not it's viable to have that boot camp open. So some of them have, in fact, evolved. And then some of them have really stagnated. A lot of the complaints that I've heard coming out of the 2U boot camps is that the curriculum is not updated frequently enough. And I think the biggest problem they have is that they have so many universities and so many instructors teaching from the same content that, like, updating it's an overhaul. We spent 1.5 years rewriting an entirely new curriculum for an asynchronous format. And I don't actually really know where that went. That was right before edX and 2U merged, and I saw the writing on the wall. Ooh, this sounds like a terrible game. I'm going to run away now. And went back to doing UX as my day job. There are other boot camps who don't appear to be using high quality materials to start with. So their evolution is never going to actually show any true value because they weren't bringing value to start with. Not going to name any names, but I'm starting to make a list.
That's fair. I hear what you're saying.
And
So
at the same time, I make a list, but at the same time, I think that there are people who are going to succeed regardless of the program that they go through. And I think that there is a lot to be said for the tenacity, the ability to go through it, but also seek out any other assistance and help. And a lot of those folks who do are the ones who seek external mentorship, not just what's offered by the boot camp, but other people. I know so many seniors and manager levels who are getting people just hitting them up out of the blue. And hopefully you find and connect with someone and that they can help your career grow. But I also know that there's more mentees than there are mentors available, and not every mentor is created the same.
Sure. And it makes sense. You should be gathering information from multiple sources, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, as a researcher, I'm sure you're like, well, I don't just take what one website says or what one user says is their experience. I need to gather contextual details. It's all about gathering information.
Exactly. For sure.
Woo! That is some real talk when it comes to UX boot camps, isn't it? Now let's go with another interview favorite of mine with Andy Vitale. He talks about the value of coming into the office to build relationships and to separate work life from home life. Let's see what Andy has to say.
Let me start off with a fun question. What's something that a lot of people may not know about you?
You know, my life is a bit of an open book. I've talked through having wrestled professionally before getting into design. I've talked about one of my first companies that I worked at. We had an anthrax attack. Those are somewhat interesting facts, but I think maybe what's probably the most interesting to me or about me now is I travel a lot for work. The last 2 jobs I've had, I've not been in the city that I live in. So I've spent a lot of time in office with people, building relationships, like making sure that the team's message is being amplified and the connections that I'm making are all like worthwhile and deep. And I think that people, when they hear that, they're like, wow, that seems like it's so hard, right? It's interesting because it allows me to, one, separate work and home a little bit, but also there are things when I'm home that I have to do because I'm home. And when I'm traveling for work, I'm more in work mode and relationship building mode and team building mode. And it really allows me to focus on the job and the people a little bit deeper. It's been interesting. It's had its challenges, right? Of course, but really we've been able to accelerate outcomes in ways that I don't know that I could have at my level if I didn't get a chance to build those connections where most people are, right? The team is fully distributed, it's flexible. I see them in the office certain days and certain people. But in the last 2 places I've been, the executive teams, they're in the office, right? They come in. It's being the one face on the screen is it's fine, obviously, but I feel there are conversations that happen that I need to be involved in to accelerate the development and advancement of design as quickly as possible.
Great. So, Andy, do you think that being in person benefits you because you're new on the job or because of your interaction with, say, senior leaders?
I think a little bit of both. I think for me, being new on the job, being able to jump into multiple conversations as they happen and get up to speed is one thing. I think the other thing are the senior leader conversations, right? It's not just the meeting that happens, the debriefing of the meeting that sometimes happens and other planning and jump to the whiteboard and do a thing. That probably isn't the same everywhere. It just happened to be the last 2 companies that I was at. My role as a chief design officer here is we know everywhere, right? The organization, they've got to bend to design in certain ways, but it doesn't happen without design bending to meet them where they are. And in this instance, it's about meeting the companies where they are so that we can continue on this journey forward. And then once we're in that place, then I don't probably have to travel nearly as much. It'll just be for key things. But right now, it's really important for me to have the right face time and being able to walk by someone's office and be like, hey, you have a second? Let me show you this thing that we're thinking or doing. And that's been more beneficial than a ping on Slack or something.
Sure, that makes sense.
Well, I guess there is some value into coming into the office after all, huh? Now let's switch over to Debbie Levitt, and she talks about AI. There's been so much chatter about AI. Is it going to take your job? Is it not going to take your job? Let's see what Debbie has to say about that.
Debbie, what is on your mind these days? I know a lot. You have your own YouTube channel. You are a successful book author. I know you're posting on LinkedIn. Right? You're everywhere. There it is. Customers Know You Suck. I absolutely have that book too.
Thank you.
Love it. So, yes, what is on your mind these days?
If I had to pick something, like I just did Jason Knight's hot take, I said I want to talk about how the democratization, which some people know I call dilution, democratization, we've been focusing on the wrong thing because we thought the end game for democratization was product managers are going to take our jobs, or engineers are going to try to design screens, and we really didn't see what was coming beyond that. And my prediction around that is by creating a universe in which anybody can do our jobs, and we don't care if those jobs are being done well or not, and there's no accountability, there's no governance, there's no standards. Anybody can do research and anybody can design, and we don't care because evidently we love failure. We're actually opening the door for AI to do our jobs badly. AI will take your job sooner than you thought because right now, a lot of UX people think AI can't take my job. AI does my job badly. Why would anybody replace me with AI doing my job badly? Here's what the slippery slope looks like. If it's okay to replace your job or partially replace it or fake augment it with, let's say, a product manager or a marketer or a developer doing your job badly, why can't AI do your job badly? And that's been kind of my hot take lately, which is uncharacteristic for me. I don't have good advice after that. Usually it's like, here's what's broken, here's what to do about it. And in this case, it's like, here's what I see coming, and I'm not too sure how to get out of the way of that boulder.
Let's talk a little bit more about that AI coming into the UX world. Why do you feel that that could take our jobs?
It's designed to take our jobs. It will help you do your job, is the spoonful of sugar. Design thinking was going to make everybody care about design and prioritize the user experience. We keep getting fed these weird Trojan horse narratives that so far haven't been true. Lean UX didn't give us a seat at the table. Lean UX disempowered us. Design thinking didn't give us a seat at the table. It disempowered us. Democratization didn't give us a seat at the table. It helped us get laid off. The messages we got about these things didn't match the messages everybody else got about these things. And so we're getting the message AI, it's really going to help you do your work better. You're just going to be so much faster. You're going to get more done. But like, that's not necessarily what other people are being told about the tools that we're being sold on. They're being told you don't need a researcher. AI is going to write the research plan, tell you what to ask. AI is going to ask those questions through a chatbot or through a speaking interaction. The message that everybody else is getting is you don't need Debbie and Jen. These systems are going to do this. These systems are going to design your stuff. These systems are going to pretend to understand your customers. And so I think that one of the key problems with AI is when it takes our job, a lot of us are going to be fake surprised. And I'm going to be going, you ushered that in. You brought that tool in because you were told it was going to make your job faster. You didn't realize that it was going to help you not work there anymore because if that can do, let's say it's going to analyze research data, which I don't think AI does well, but let's just pretend. If someone brings in a tool to analyze research data, maybe we start wondering, what's Debbie doing? What's Jen doing? Why can't we have a marketer talk to some people and give it to the AI? Why can't the product manager call a few customers and give it to the AI? Why can't the AI chatbot a few customers and give it to itself? The thing is, a slippery slope argument is very often the sky is falling. We're going to marry toasters, with these weird things that you hear people say. Even though I'm admitting it's a slippery slope argument and therefore flawed or musing about an unknown future, it is possible that someone will say, I don't think we need Debbie, or I don't think we need Debbie as much because look, this AI claims to talk to our users and find out what they need.
Wow. Yeah. Scary stuff. I was having a conversation the other day with a former coworker, and they had a good point about AI replacing UX researchers. She mentioned that the actual conducting of the research is very much a small part of the whole end-to-end process. A lot of it is stakeholder management, gathering that context, not just coming up with a research plan, but there's a lot that goes into coming up with that research plan, that holistic knowledge of the product or the line of business. So thinking about those important soft skills that researchers have to tap into to even come up with a study, which the actual research study is a very small piece of all of that. Think about that context. How do you feel about AI taking our jobs?
Except NNG has a shitty article saying AI can do that for you.
Stakeholder management.
I don't know if it says stakeholder management, but it says ChatGPT can write your research plan.
I have heard of people creating a research plan using a tool like that.
question I've been asking people to ask themselves around any aspect of democratization is, are you teaching your coworkers that your job is somewhat unnecessary or somewhat replaceable? I don't see me or you as replaceable by robots and LLMs and AI anytime soon. Maybe way out in the future, but as of now, no. And the funny thing is, even when I ask, the only AI I use right now, other than everyday things like Google Maps and Otter, like other than those obvious things, but the only AI thing I use right now is sometimes I'll ask stuff to Claude just to see what it says. I asked Claude, should AI do UX research? And it came back and said no. Claude claims to be very good at critical thinking and deductive reasoning. So I like to give it critical thinking questions to see what it does. And it gave me this whole critical thinking breakdown on why AI shouldn't do UX research.
Wow. What were some of the things, if you remember?
The human involvement of interacting with people and reading people, the idea of observing, which AI is not going to see people just yet, seeing people, hearing people. An example that I give is I have a question that I ask every LLM every time somebody says you have to try this AI. And I ask it, and as a researcher, you're going to make question face. I ask it, please give me the most compelling examples of word painting in Brahms' Requiem. Thank you for doing good neutral face. Brahms' Requiem is a piece of music of the Romantic period by Brahms. It is a requiem, so it is a death-related piece. And it is famous for being full of what we in music call word painting. Hello, degree in music. An LLM can only know examples of word painting from having been trained on articles, videos, academic papers on other people saying, here's an example of word painting, whether or not it's accurate. Now, why do I pick this? Because I wrote a 20-page paper about it in college. Because I can hear the music, I can read the music, I can know stuff about the music. To me, this is akin to what a researcher is doing. A researcher is interacting with an orchestra and a choir and soloists and a conductor and an audience. And that's some of the stakeholder management that you're talking about. But it's also, if I'm talking to someone and they look like they're about to cry, I have information that the LLM is not going to get from being in that session live or checking a transcript later. That is something a human picks up about another human, or as you and I might say, a dog picks up about a human. And that's why I use this musical example to test LLMs, because it reminds me that it can't go into the music and say, I found my own example of word painting, regardless of what I was trained on. That's true artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is, I know how to analyze music, and I went into the score of Brahms' Requiem and I found an uncommon example of word painting. It doesn't do that yet, which means it cannot do that when you superimpose that example over human research experiences, whether those are in the field or over a call like this. And so that these are some of my warnings to people. Is like, AI could do your job, but it wouldn't do it well. And do we care if it should be done well? I do. Some people don't seem to.
And those who don't seem to don't know what it means to do it well.
That is often true, especially when they have more knowledge and familiarity with market or marketing research, where they say, well, we want to know more about users, send them a survey. Or we want to know more about users, let's get 7 of them in a focus group. And, there's a song lyric that I always love to invoke at this point, which is, tell me what you think about this low-fat diet crunchy shampoo. Tell me what you think about this low-fat diet shampoo. Do you think it's crunchy, half crunchy, or not crunchy at all? Put a tick in the appropriate box. Yes, those are song lyrics. If you think that that is the pinnacle of user feedback or user understanding or target audience discovery and investigation, then it's going to seem like AI can do some or all of that. But if you're more familiar with the power and capabilities around more conversation and observational based research, then you know that nothing replaces it. But if you're less familiar with that, or you've read some shitty product management book that makes it sound like UX research is calling some white guy and asking him what our product is missing. You have a beginner's understanding of it, but let's not pretend you have beyond that.
Low fat, crunchy diet shampoo. Oh, I love Debbie. She speaks the truth. And for more truth bombs, I got to bring in some more Thomas. This is a fun one where we kind of stroll down memory lane and talk about how the UX and the design industry has changed through the years. Check it out.
Well, and that's an interesting point. The knowledge shift you were talking, ooh, you were dragging me through my past because
Right.
I come from a journalism graphics background where I was definitely a print designer. And I know when you say DPI 300 or somebody
Yeah.
would send
Yeah.
you a logo
Right.
in a Word document, how that crushes your soul. So the knowledge was more about the formats and the fonts and the fundamentals of graphic design and output, the different resolutions, where now resolutions are not the factor so much, and maybe it's more about the technology and the tools. Maybe
You
the
just
knowledge has shifted.
you just download your photos off of Shutterstock or off of Adobe. Like you don't have to know anything about photography. I used to take pictures of bulldozers and then go do the clipping path around them and then put them in the brochure. And now you just download a bulldozer and you click the
Right.
magic wand and it outlines it for you. And you're like, wow, this is great. But
Absolutely. Or you upload it to a website and it just swipes the background out for you. It's a whole different skill set for sure. I know exactly what you're talking about, taking that pen tool and tracing around in Photoshop and meticulously going around hair and
clipping
fine
paths,
leaves. Yes, absolutely. And
yeah,
now that's a bit of a thing of the past. So has the knowledge shifted to other things? Things
right.
that we
And
used
you
to have to do are now kind of automated or simplified, where now the knowledge is on something else.
Right. But I feel like some of the fundamentals and those steps that happened when I started out, and maybe you started out on the ground floor doing production work and doing grunt work. And I mean, let's just not split hairs and just use the words that fit best. We're doing grunt work, you were a production worker, and there was somebody above you and somebody above that person, and you answered to that person, and you did grueling hours and you did some of that stuff, but you learned. There's that learning, that mentor mentee relationship, that stepped and kind of cadenced learning. I feel like that's kind of been lost. You mentioned something a second ago about your journalism background, which segues nicely into why I want to focus on EX and CX, organizational design and service design, and lots of discovery. The reason why I want to do all of that work is because I feel like a lot of the traditional UX stuff kind of went by the wayside and it got sucked up into UI and product design. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not going to be one of those people who cries about it online. I'll talk a little smack, but I'm just going to pivot and go dance over here because no matter what, I'm going to pay my bills and I'm going to do the kind of projects I want to do and I'm going to solve the kind of problems I want to solve and I'm going to garner a paycheck from it. And it doesn't really matter if I'm rich or not. I want to be happy, of course, like most people. I'm not willing to work for a whole lot of companies. The list of places I won't work is a lot longer now than it was when I was 25 or 30. The thing I wanted to mention to you about your journalism background is everybody's got a different opinion, but the reason why I'm starting to shift and pivot, and I've pivoted several times in my career, is I've determined from doing hundreds of websites, hundreds of apps, and having, a lot of trial and error and mistakes and learning failures, that the largest issue that occurs in large organizations and enterprises, it isn't your code and it isn't your buttons or your design systems. Yeah, those are issues and they need to be solved for. The biggest issue that I have seen, and the reason why most call centers blow up all of the time and are overburdened, is content is the biggest sorest spot. And now content managers, if they exist anymore, because they're getting rid of those people too, right? When you get something mailed to you and you get something in your inbox in your email, you get something texted, or you go online to read on one of 100 websites in a giant organization or an app, and all of the things describing a specific product or service are different. They're in a different language. Some are first person conversational. Some sound like they're old English. heretofore we shall, and you're like, who wrote this? Like King Dingaling. It just sounds like it's from the Dark Ages, or it's robot talk, and it's not enough contractions. You read that stuff and you understand that like a lot of people over a certain age, but a lot of people who are like seniors and like our parents and older, they're just going to call in. They're going to go, you know what? I'm just going to pick up the phone. This doesn't make any sense. And what's really going on is it's a content issue that information architecture woes and microcopy woes, all of that is being left to content designers. And a lot of content designers just in the last 2 or 3 years got laid off and they're like, what do I do? So now they're going into conversational design. They're trying to pivot, which is smart, but that's the reason why I'm excited about just staying in my lane, because I've done a lot of employee experience stuff and I've done service design, and I love customer experience work and putting customers first and humans first. So I'm gonna go do that.
So let me dig a little deeper into that content problem. Is the
Okay.
problem the inconsistency across the channels or
Right.
something else?
You have each LOB might have its own designer, its own writer.
Yes.
And writers, if you're a journalism major, you know exactly what I'm about to say. There's a lot of different kind of writers.
Yeah.
There's
Oh,
people
yeah.
who are great at micro copy, short copy, long copy, people who understand journalism, people who understand Marcom ad speak, people who are AP style or a Chicago manual of style, or they understand the looseness and the chaos of like ad copy, and especially H1s. Trust me when I tell you, 9 times out of 10, when they hire someone who has a writing resume, they're people that just, wrote in high school or college, but they don't know anything about the zing and the zip of the advertising marketing, kind of like writing great taglines or keeping all of your navigation copy, 1 word or 2 words or all verbs or all nouns. Like they
Yes.
mix that stuff up. And as soon as I see that stuff, I'm like, okay, I don't know what kind of writer you are, but you're not a writer of digital copy of websites or microcopy.
Yeah.
Right.
And to your point, it could be different departments, different lines of business, right? Have different writers, or the product owner is just writing, or they may not have a designated writer at all.
Right.
And so there you start to see those differences
Right.
across those
Right.
different products or touch points, right?
And that's all complexity. That's all cognitive load. You're stumping the user unintentionally. And so because that is to me the biggest problem that I see as far as digital is concerned, most of the time. Well, now it's the lack of UX, those traditional UX skills. Those are the 2 biggest things that I see. I feel like those are important issues, but now that I know that, and now that I've used the law of first principles and I can't deduce it anymore, that's the problem most
Yeah.
of the time. I feel like a much larger problem is organizational design structures, who we are as a business, what kind of culture we're creating, because all problems that exist in the world are design problems, right? All of them are some form of design problem. Design itself is a cultural problem within organizations. And so understanding that culture, understanding power and influence and how power moves around. Power is never born and it never dies. It just transfers. It's energy. Understanding how that power works so that you can kind of surf it and navigate it and harness it is really important. And being able to map and understand stakeholders and understand what's driving them with regards to like incentives and compensation and things like that. Because one of the big things that's happening, and product is having a huge come to Jesus like right now too. Like for designers and researchers, it was the last 3 years. Right now, if you follow a lot of product people online, they're backpedaling, they're trying to figure out, like they're denouncing things that they were 100% proselytizing and pushing 2 years ago or a year ago. And a lot of people are starting to be apologists and saying things and writing things that lead me to believe that they're starting to understand that a lot of this stuff we bit off on and we're sold is a bunch of bunk.
Do you have an example of something
Yeah,
that
of course. Like most of the product first stuff, this notion that first of all, design and engineers need a mediary who's really secretly their job foreman in the form of a PM. And that
Yeah.
PM needs to be all knowing and all seeing and all powerful. And that all they need is empowerment, which is a Marty Kagan thing. And all they need is more power and they need to be like a little mini CEO. This is all garbage. It doesn't work. It's junk. And we've been on that Kool-Aid since Eric Rice tried to tell everybody in the world we need to function like startups. And it just doesn't work. And it's okay to say it because it's true. We need to move on and we need to shift gears. And that's why I'm hopeful, and I'm a little bit different than some of my contemporaries. I believe we're in a state of flux. I believe we're in a state of transition. We have not landed here. Okay. So stop panicking. What's the British thing? Be calm and shut the
Carry
F
on.
up. Be calm and chillax. That's like something that my son would have said. You just need to realize that we're in a state of transition, and don't freak out, because there's no way we're staying here, and businesses are not dumb. And eventually C-suite is going to go, hey man, you blamed research for taking too long and you blamed designers for dragging their feet, but now we did what you wanted and everything is matrixed and everything is flat and it still isn't working. In fact, we think it's worse. And that's the truth. The truth is, after implementing all of these goofy product ideas, there has never been a worse time in history. Cory Doctorow came up with the term enshittification for a reason. It's because it's apropos for right now. Okay.
Tell me about that term.
It wouldn't have been a good term 20 years ago. It's great right now. And it's great right now because the thing is, all of these guys, when you listen to their words, they're all knocking off and borrowing from Deming. W. Edwards Deming, the dude who went over to Toyota and taught them all about lean and manufacturing. But if you go read all of the 14 tenets or 14 rules of whatever it is, I'm going to wrap it up in a second, but they're all about like breaking down silos. They're all about continuous improvement. They're all about iteration, about breaking down barriers, getting rid of goofy metrics for metrics' sake. That was one of his big things was, hey, if you incentivize certain stats, people are going to juke the stats, meaning they're going to fake things until they get that number so they get the reward. That's how humans are. The whole gist of it was about quality. It was about creating quality. And none of these people, none of them are talking about quality. And the reason is they can't, because what they're doing is they replace quality with speed, scale, velocity. They're using all these words that just mean we need to grow. What are you growing? A turd? You're growing a terrible, unusable piece of junk into a giant, unusable piece of junk. You're growing this small thing that's harming the consumer or harming your users or doing them wrong in some kind of way. And you've got all these black hat, dark pattern things happening. And so what are you really scaling? You're going from a little Death Star to a big one. And so I think that's where we all need to come full circle back to quality. Like, hey, let's make something that's of high quality. And the way that you make something of high quality is you empower designers and researchers. You empower them to do their job. Because what I hear when I listen to all these product folks talking is they're borrowing our language and they're selling it to technicals. They're, when they start saying, oh, we need to do continuous discovery. Thanks. You didn't invent that term. We've been talking about that for 30 years. Okay. In fact, I just told you how Deming was doing it 50 years ago. This idea that, oh, we need to talk to customers. Are you kidding? We need to do more ethnography. And they're selling this as if it's some newfangled idea. And all these product people and these technicals and these MBAs and these bean counters are drinking it up. They're like, oh my God, this is excellent. And they're regurgitating and repeating each other. And they're all clicking on this stuff. And I'm just sitting back and yawning and going, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah, everything old is new again,
It's
right?
new again. And they're renaming it. They're just renaming this stuff and selling it to them. And that's how you know it's BS, is because it's starting to take on like a toxic, boring religion. And I just think that whole product first stuff, it's had its time. It's time to put it to bed. It's gross. It doesn't work.
Yep. Everything old is new again. All the cycles, so much fun. Now I want to switch over to Nisreen McConkie, where she talks about an organization's UX maturity, how to gauge it, how to increase it, and what does it look like? Because a lot of maturity models usually focus on design. So what about UX research maturity? Let's see what she has to say.
So, Nisreen, what's on your mind these days? When it comes to research, I think it's about the research maturity journey. I think there is a time when we talked a lot about the design maturity journey, and you have a lot of maturity models that reflect that. I don't think we're talking enough as a research, like thought leadership group about what that maturity journey looks like for research in particular, because there's different flags, there's different signals, there's different things that you need to invest in to mature a research team. When I think about it, I'm thinking about things like research operations. research can be really, really slow when you don't have the operations in place to facilitate quality recruitment, for example, or the research tooling landscape is really, really fragmented and can be really expensive if you're not navigating it appropriately. So to be really efficient with your budget, it's helpful to have a leader who's really well versed in operations, or to even have a research operations lead or team that you're coordinating with to really navigate those relationships and build up a toolbox that's effective for the sort of research that your team is doing. So I feel like operations is a key one. I think another one is a lot of researchers talk about, we want to be strategic, we want to be strategic, we want to be strategic. But we get stuck in what I call the evaluative vortex, where you're not doing a lot of generative work. So to reduce risk in launching new products or launching optimization, you're doing a ton of usability testing because that's all that you can do to reduce the level of risk, because you don't have other knowledge to inform whether or not you're making the right design decisions. And especially if you're working on a product where any sort of change can have a massive impact on your company's bottom line, that becomes really problematic, right? Because everybody wants to reduce that risk. You kind of get stuck in that space. And so
Yeah.
that's something else that I think is part of the research maturity journey as well, is investing the time and becoming more up funnel.
Yeah, I think that is quite tricky because I think a lot of organizations, you're right, start with that evaluative testing, usability testing.
I think in order to move out of that space, you need to work really effectively with your partners to decide what is our risk tolerance as an organization, and where are we comfortable with taking on more risk versus less, so that we can move ahead in the process and do more of that foundational research that can inform things down the line.
And it's challenging to show the value of actually doing that generative research, getting ahead of those product decisions and showing how to mitigate risk. You mentioned that, but how do you show the value of that if you don't actually have the opportunity or the time to do that generative research?
I think about it in two different ways, right? One is that you can do it through the work. The way that it shows up through the work is integrating more exploratory questions into the evaluative research that you're doing, so that you're not just evaluating the design and its usability and its efficacy in solving a customer problem, but you're also starting to evaluate whether that problem exists at all. Maybe it's not ideal because you're not doing a full IDI or more in-depth qualitative study that you want to do to inform that, but it gives you a couple of data points to rely on, so that when you're delivering your results, if you're seeing conflicts, you can raise that. And we could have found this out sooner before investing time in design if we were involved more upfront. Look, this is how I would have done it differently. Why don't we pilot that next time? So it's a good way of showing the value of that data in a very specific use case. Another way that you can look at it too is just in conversations we're having around how we want to design against something, how we want to solve against something. I find a lot of times we question ourselves a lot as a design team. Is this the best way? We generate a lot of ideas. It's part of the design process, right? To think about all of the different ways that we can solve a particular problem. And a lot of times we waste a lot of time talking in circles about what the best approach is before finally aligning on one and getting it to a good place for testing. So as those sort of circular conversations are happening, something I like to do is call out, hey, if we did some upfront research now, we can inform the best direction. And sometimes, depending on how timelines are malleable, maybe the design team can focus on something where there's a little bit more certainty or focus on what the right solution would be. And then we can table working on the design for the thing we're less certain about, invest some time in research, and then inform the design process that way. So I've also found that to be really effective in being, hey, we clearly have a lack of alignment about which direction we want to go in. This is just taking more and more time. In fact, research can speed up this process versus slow it down. So that also goes against the common myth that research is a blocker, research is slow. By driving alignment and facilitating decision making, research can actually speed things rather than slow things down.
Yes, I totally agree. We have the opportunity to really inform direction and say, this is the user need. And this is the problem we need to solve, right? And give that to the team that kind of North Star to make those design decisions and not be, like you mentioned, swirling around trying to decide which solution is best.
So, Nisreen, we're talking about UX maturity. What wish people knew about UX or UX research when it comes to your job? What do you wish they understood better?
I think it's like how highly contextual it is. It's not just about design principles or design best practices, although those are really, really important. I think it's understanding how people are interacting with technologies in their daily lives. That's where the magic is. And especially post pandemic, I think a lot of teams have devoted more and more time into like remote research. It's faster, it's easier, it's cheaper a lot of the time. But we kind of like lose understanding how people are interacting with things in the moment. Like if I'm shopping on Amazon, for example, I'm really like sitting down, walking through a flow, thinking about it kind of as I go along. It's usually I'm off listening to something my husband's saying or watching my son play in the background. So just understanding where people are like mentally in their lives and how that's driving decision making as they interact with the flow. I think that's something that not just non UX people recognize, but sometimes even we as a discipline can sometimes.
Yeah. And how small our product is in their world and their ecosystem.
Exactly. There's like such a large journey that's often associated with any particular like app or product. And that app or product is one part of that greater journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you find that teams are becoming more open to exploring that external world besides the product or service that your company is offering?
I think it really depends on what company you're supporting and what their priorities are, right? If your business priorities are really focused on things like conversion and moving through an application flow, you're going to be considering how you research that very differently than something that's more like discovery based, right? And so I think it really depends on the interaction patterns that exist with that product and the business priorities that are driving that.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Thinking about, again, as we've kind of talked about some similar themes and maturity and whatnot, I think sometimes a lower sign of maturity is the researcher goes off, does the work, and brings the report back and says, voila, here it is. Versus having your partners, product partners, designers, even tech participate with you, not the research, but observe and help plan and review your research plan and whatnot.
I have definitely been that researcher that was told to go off and do research and then come back and show up and throw up the results. Ugh, it's really frustrating. Let's switch a little bit and talk about being that lone UX researcher. I have been the UX team of one, and I know the struggle is real. So let's check out what Julian Della Mattia has to say about that.
So, Julian, what's on your mind these days?
Plenty of things. These days have been super filled with things, really. I'm creating this little universe called From Finders to Builders, which is...
Okay. Tell me about that.
It's a little bit funny that I call it universe, but the thing is, like, I release many things at the same time. So I released the new website with a newsletter, the podcast, and now a community. So everything is for first researchers in the organization or teams of one. Being the first one or the only one can be a bit lonely sometimes. And also in terms of the challenge for a researcher, it's a little bit of a particular challenge because it kind of combines being a researcher with the operations part. So it's a mix of both. And you also have to start something. You need to also help build the culture, build the infrastructure, and build the relationship. So it's a little bit of a mixed role with different things. So it's a very particular challenge. In most of my career, I've been the first researcher or even the only one sometimes. So I've been there even with clients through the agency. That's pretty much my experience. So it's actually fine because I noticed more people were reaching out to me or people that I was mentoring. It's like, yeah, I'm the first researcher. And so it's okay, fine. Let's start a movement. Let's start something where we can all get together, share tips, share tricks, vent sometimes. Sometimes you need to just vent and say, is this only happening to me? It's like,
yes. No, it's happening to me too. Why did you find that that was kind of your niche or the problem you wanted to try to solve? That first researcher or a UX researcher of one? Why was that? I know you said because you've been that person, but why are you honing in on that need?
Well, apart from that bit, it's because I believe that a big chunk of the future of UX research lies in all those companies that don't have a researcher yet, and those researcher jobs that might open in the long run. And all those jobs would be first researchers. So we have different flows. We have people coming to the industry. We have people who are transitioning from different parts of maybe tech or product, maybe from different places or academia even. Plus we have the challenge of being the first researcher. So there are many things going on. And I think that in the upcoming years, if we are also, if, as researchers, we are successful at showcasing our value and showcasing why companies should have researchers, I think this is going to create an effect of new jobs that are going to open. And for me, this is where I can create value because I've been there. I have no idea how to work in a team of 50 researchers because I've never been there, or how to build the operations for 100 researchers or like different verticals and different, no clue. But this I know. This has been pretty much my career. So I said, okay, fine. This is where I can create value. So why not help first researchers who are starting now and maybe researchers who are going to be the first researchers in the future?
Yeah, that makes sense. What do you find, Julian, are some of the biggest challenges when you are that solo researcher?
Okay, do we have a whole episode in this? So there are many challenges, and this will also, it will vary depending on what kind of company you're joining and who's bringing you in. So it depends on how do they perceive research, if they were conducting some sort of research before and they need someone to step up their game, versus someone believes in research, maybe a VP of product or a design lead or and they bring the researcher, and that's a different game because you need to fight a different fight. So the challenges are very, very different, and somehow they're kind of case to case basis because it can change completely depending on how you're brought in. The challenges most people or most researchers face is like, okay, how do other teams adopt research? How do they think of research? How do they understand the value that research can bring? How can they make better decisions? How can also, in some cases, how can they be enabled or empowered to conduct certain sorts of research with a researcher next to them? That's important. It's not just, yeah, okay, you go and do the research. How do you create these synergies? And then also all the challenges outside the product organization. Okay, how do people maybe in senior management understand research, and how can research help mitigate risk or help the company make better decisions? So there are different challenges at different levels. And you also have the whole challenge of the building the infrastructure. It's not just like, hey, here comes the researcher. Now we know more, we know better. You say, okay, how do we create systems? How do we create processes to get the right customers within the guidelines that we need to comply with, or with a good cadence? How do we actually incentivize? How do we nurture these relationships? All these things are also a big part of the challenge that relates to the infrastructure part. So that's probably, I would say, 50% of the role.
And when you say
sometimes.
infrastructure, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm assuming you mean internal infrastructure as well as an infrastructure with customer or user facing, right? How you're going to tackle both of those fronts. Is that fair?
Yeah, definitely. And also, it's not just inside the research team, but also connecting with other teams. For example, let's imagine you work in a B2B company and you also need to coordinate with customer success or customer support. How do you connect with them? How often? What are the things? What are the things you discuss in, for example, customer calls? Or what are the things? Oh, how can you get other teams to chip in and also bring knowledge to you? So all that infrastructure outside the research team is something that you also need to build, all those channels of communication or channels that can help insights flow within, or knowledge flow within the organization. It can get super big. If you think about it, sometimes in larger companies, maybe you have an operations person dedicated to that. And here you have to kind of like wear different hats, because at the same time, you need to build the infrastructure for your practice to thrive, or to start shaping up a practice. But you also need to conduct research yourself and hands-on research, most likely. Because at some point, we brought in a researcher. So okay, where's the research? So you also need to do that. So
Yeah,
you need
true.
you need to balance between both.
Yeah, for sure. You actually have to do some research around building a good foundation and getting your partners brought along with you. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes, I love what Julian's talking about when he says building relationships across departments is so beneficial when you are UX team of one. So now I want to move on to Meena Kothandaraman. She is fantastic. And I really love how she talks about slowing down and really getting immersed in the data. Not just the research team, but the whole team. Really get involved and just totally absorbing all that information in when it comes to insights gathered from research. Let's hear what Meena has to say about slowing down.
I would love to ask you a little bit more, Meena. What about that, even if they're not strictly a qualitative researcher, it could be a designer who wants to do some research per se, or well, they want to do the research to inform their designs or their decisions. What tips do you have to someone to say to their product partner, slow down, give me the opportunity to do this? What kind of education or partnership tips do you have there?
And Jen, I know this. There is a 2x2 that we've put together at Twig and Fish that has helped us really explain that. And if we think of this 2x2 and one vector specifically is to inform product or to inspire design. And that is our horizontal vector on the 2x2. And if I focused on that alone, that is our way of describing where people who are hybrid kind of folks, so the unicorns, so to speak, of I'm a designer and researcher or researcher and designer in whatever order you like. In those situations, we have them really focus on the product side. Because at the end of the day, if you identify more as a designer, which I don't know as many people who feel they're strong researchers or their primary goal is to conduct research activity and they dabble in design. Like I don't hear that as much. I hear it the other way, which is I'm a designer and I dabble in a little bit of research. But when you are a designer, I firmly believe your goal is to solve. Your goal is to generate solution. That's what your passion is. And you're probably very good at it, or I hope you are. And when we think about designers then, if we place them on the product side of the fence, so to speak, to inform the product, they really thrive there. So this is talking about how to potentially co-create, do co-creation activities with participants, or potentially doing some sort of evaluation like a usability test. These are natural to a designer because it is all in the moment of solutioning for the product. Where I tend to push designers away a little bit is when we start to think about how to inspire to advance the product, how to inspire so that we start to learn from the humans around us. That's where I ask researchers to really focus. And the reason is your job is to go in and purely listen to the story. You need to be almost expert listeners. By the time you, Jen, as my participants, start to talk and you start to tell me about how you are combating the heat and the heat wave this summer, I'm not already trying to solve for it in my head, and I've actually lost half of your story. I think that's really important to understand, that you have to not only be able to hear the whole story, you also have to have skill in eliciting that story. So it's two sides that I think that's where the super skill of somebody who is in research and is a researcher day in and day out, especially with qualitative research, you need to know how to get the person you're talking to or the people you're talking to unpack that story, to unravel those things they tend not to talk about, to take a moment and almost go, why do I clean my house that way? Like, they need to think about it themselves, because they're not waking up every morning going, I'll tell you why I clean my house this way, Jen. It's not what they're thinking about, right? They're thinking about, gosh, got to get breakfast on the table and then maybe run out the door and catch the bus or whatever it is. We have to be able to place people in that moment without hurrying them to solution. And unfortunately, when I have seen, and I'm sure there are some people out there who feel like they do a brilliant job, but when I do see the hybrids on the side of inspiration, where you're really trying to just generate that story and really understand and unpack these moments that could be really precious for people, I find that they get glossed over. Or somehow, have you thought about this? Have you tried doing this? And suddenly the solutioning starts to come in. And that's where I'm just like, no, you were so close and don't do it. So that's where I feel like that's where the line should be drawn. And I'll even say for the researcher who's embedded in an organization, when they are embedded, a lot of times you are somewhat biased of the organization and the way the organization functions and why certain decisions have been made the way they have. So if you're really trying to break the barriers and think innovatively of coming up with a brand new product, then your goal in that moment is to actually stop and partner with somebody who doesn't drink your Kool-Aid. And that's what an external researcher would really have play, because they have no bias. They have no stake in the game. They're just coming in and listening unabashedly to everything. There's some things that you might have actually closed your ears to because, oh, you know that stakeholder A is never going to accept that.
Yeah, that's true. I can definitely concur with the designer researcher mentality of I'm listening for solutions or things that might inform my solutions or designs. I've seen it done. I've gone into a debrief after a session. Of course, I have the rule, no solutioning here. We're debriefing what they say, and then often they do slip in solutioning when I tell them not to. But they bring up things when they're talking about solutions, or this person said this and they have this problem. And the next step is, and our product can do this for them, or we should design this. I'm never even thinking about those things. I come out of an interview, like you said, focusing on all the little things that they said. Wow, can you believe they clean their house because it's Tuesday and that's when their mother always cleaned the house? Little details like that. And they're already thinking, I need to put a notification in the app to let them know it's Tuesday to clean. And I'm like, oh, yeah, okay. And
it's dwelling in that story a little bit as well. If I suddenly, in the middle of this conversation, said, and by the way, I didn't tell you, Jen, I actually want to ask you about how you invest your extra money that you have at the end of every month. How do you actually invest it? And you're just going to be like, oh, and you got to stop and you're going to probably think about it. And then if you give me an answer, it might be the answer. And when people say, people just give you like an answer to please you, it's not about pleasing you. They just want to answer the question and feel like they're actually capable at a moment and also servicing the need of being a participant in answering your question. But nobody goes in to say, I'm going to give a completely shoddy response to Jen today because that's what I want to do. Nobody goes in with that intent. So it's important to get people to take a moment to unravel that reality. But it's equally important for the people listening to almost take 2x the amount of time to process that, to go through it and to think about what all Jen just told me about. Wow, so her mother cleaned on Tuesday. Like, that's really interesting. Is it attached to habit? Is it attached to nostalgia? What are we talking about here? Does she clean the same way as her mother? Or maybe doesn't clean anymore because she is trapped in a house where it was so clean. She doesn't want to feel like there's something much greater that we need to understand. Because when we think about these 4 ways of describing, human existence, where we have behaviors, we have aptitudes, we have attitudes and emotions, our behaviors and our aptitudes change very rapidly, but our attitudes and emotions are a bit more long-lasting. So we want to go after that data, but yet, I'm a designer, and again, nothing against my designer friends. Your focus is to act. Your focus is to solution. So you want to know what somebody's doing in that moment. How they're thinking about something, what their perceptions are toward it might not be as important because you don't feel it services your solution, but it actually does for a much greater, longer time if we can give it just a little bit of time to percolate.
How do you recommend getting your team to percolate on those things a little bit longer?
Great question. So something that we do, and this comes down to process, this comes down to practice, is when we actually start out, and again, we are an external consultancy, and I teach at Bentley University. I tell my students the same thing, whether they're internal or external to a company. When you start, the goal is to make sure that people understand the entire arc of your qualitative research study. So it's not to say that just give me your questions, then I'm going to run away, and then, hey, join us on this day and you can listen in. It's to tell them at every step, this is how we're going to work together, because it's not for one researcher or two researchers, even to just listen and to disseminate that information to the team. It's for the team to immerse themselves in that listening. And it's not to say it has to be in context, whatever form it's taking, whether it's in context, in person, remote, they have to be listening. They have to be fully present. And I use that word very intentionally, but they have to be fully present to listen to what this person is telling us about how they're cleaning their house, if we take that example. And we set that timeline from the beginning of our studies, and we give very specific dates and very specific tasks. This is when you are going to have to be present. This is when you do not have to be present. In fact, go away. And it's very important for them to understand that they are not bearing the burden of that process. They're simply being shepherded through it. So when we tell them we give them an orientation. This is our protocol now. We would have collaboratively constructed that protocol. Here's the protocol. Here's your orientation. As an observer, as a listener, this is what you're going to do. Here's how you're going to take notes. Here's where you're going to take notes. Here's what we're going to do after every session. We're going to debrief. So if the session, let's pretend, is an hour long, their calendar invite will be for 90 minutes because they have to be there for the debrief. And it's time that we ask for even before we start recruiting, so way up front. And it's to give them that expectation that there is structure to the process. There is intention in how we do our work so that they're like, okay, I get it. So then we do this. And then if we all have a moment where we can percolate, you are responsible for your own notes, Jen. You have to take your own notes and you're going to look through them. And then once we've finished all of our data gathering and our little mini debrief, we are then going to go into a phase of analysis where we have a raw data workshop. We simply talk about the data, talk about things that are interesting. It is highly facilitated. So it's not to say that it's a free-for-all, but it is intentional because let's say I'm making this up. You have 16 participants. We are going to go through every participant in a way that helps us hear. What did Jen feel she heard? What did so-and-so feel they heard? Who else heard something? And then suddenly somebody goes, wow, Jen, you heard that? I never heard that. Or wow, Meena, you said this and I didn't know where you got that follow-up question from. Can you help me understand? Oh, good question. But it gives the team the permission to not jump to conclusions, but to simply discuss. Because to me, that is, in my world and the way we function as an organization, is that's where the magic actually happens. I always use the analogy of a tree, right? You're climbing a tree. You want to get to the top of the tree. The top of the tree is your presentation. But if I take somebody and airlift them to the top of the tree, if they look down, they're never going to understand why certain branches were avoided, why certain branches were leveraged. But if you are part of that moment where you're talking about things very organically and you're climbing the tree and you go up a branch that we almost got to the top, but the branch got really weak, then you're going to come back down and go to the right and go to a different branch. If you are part of that, you will be less quizzical or challenging of what you hear in the final presentation, because to you it makes sense how that all came about. And it doesn't have to be incredibly time consuming either. Some people will think, great, I don't have hours in the day, Meena. You don't need hours in the day. But if a process is put together with little bits and bytes all along the way, where those breadcrumbs are dropped, we don't lose people.
Right. So you're saying have your partner not only observe the interviews, but participate in the analysis as well?
They have to, because at the end of the day, we are definitely experts in what we do. We're very confident of it. But we don't know the domain. We don't know the background as well as you do. But what we're doing is helping you bring structure to how you get answers to your questions, because you and I have spoken about this at length. Research is just the act of getting answers to questions. That's really what it is at the very basic level. So let's not scare people with this word research, but when you have a question and you want an answer, nobody says, just give me an answer. I don't care. People want a high confidence answer. They want an answer that they can build on. They want an answer that gives them strength to be able to move forward, or inspiration, or something that gives them that internal or intrinsic confidence to say, this feels right. This feels great. And it's not just one person who should feel that. It needs to be an aligned moment. That alignment is imperative.
I really love the idea of getting all of your team, product owners, designers, all of them, to really wallow and absorb the data that you collect from UX research. It's so valuable. Now, I want to switch to another speaker who talks about content creation. There's so many options. Chris breaks it down for us so that we can kind of navigate the big world of content creation. Let's check it out.
Okay, that sounds great. So you're talking about creating content. What kind of content are you creating?
I'm doing quite a bit. I've slowed down recently, but at one point we were doing a TikTok every day, a YouTube short every day, a YouTube long once a week, a bi-weekly newsletter, and then posting every day on LinkedIn and Twitter. Now that's not the case. I no longer do these short videos every day because it is a lot and a lot of work. But at one point it was like, how many platforms can we be on? And can we just blitz these platforms? But now what's consistent is LinkedIn is every day, near enough, I think. Yeah, every day or near enough, but 800 days in a row. Same with Twitter, a weekly newsletter. So we scaled that down back to a week. And then sometimes videos on YouTube, Instagram. And I also do 2 live events monthly. These are broadcasted on LinkedIn or whatever the video streaming platforms are. And the good thing is I repurpose everything. So I can write once and then it can go on a bunch of different platforms. But those are the typical things I'm doing, more writing than videos these days.
Okay. Yeah, don't beat yourself up. One a day. Woo, that's a lot of content. Wow. So, Chris, what made you decide what platform you were going to put what content?
I first started on Twitter and LinkedIn. I optimized the content for Twitter, just writing, because it was short, but we would do threads. So then I was just like, okay, I'll just throw it on LinkedIn. And when the Twitter growth and LinkedIn growth didn't, and it just compounded over time at a better rate, that really helped. So the data there really helped. So now LinkedIn is one of the most effective channels for me in terms of audience and growth. But fundamentally, I always just look at the data. It's not always about impressions, followers, and views. Actually, if you're running your own thing and the goal is conversion, then you're thinking about like, how many people come from this channel to my website, right? And then out of those people, how many of them convert, right?
Okay. Yeah, don't.
So the content that you put out should ideally resonate with those people on that platform to then lead them to your desired goal. When you decide on which platform it is, of course, you have to think about what kind of content is it. Like a video on LinkedIn might do well, but might not do well. It might do better on Instagram. It really depends what kind of content it is as well. So you have to take those things into account. Yeah.
Sure. Do you consider some of the, I'll say guesses of what content will work best or better on a certain platform? Do you feel like it's a crapshoot, or do you feel like there is a bit of a formula that is working?
I think it's probably a bit of both. I think you can look at others and be like, okay, well, that performed for that person. Will it perform for me? And I do those experiments all the time, right? Because some of them work out, some of them don't. Twitter is quite known for memes, and only recently LinkedIn opened up to that. So I think it's just around experimentation. I don't think there's a set formula. I think as someone who creates content, just try a bunch of shit. And then if your audience likes it, they like it. And then can you then repurpose that again? Because if you look at, and I like to use Clio, shout out to Trevor, a great product. If you use Clio and you look at some really big content creators like Justin Welsh, 4 out of his top 10 posts are recycled, maybe even 6. Literally the same content that he posts 3 months later. Like might have changed the image. He might have slightly changed the hook. Sometimes he doesn't change anything and it still blows up. So it's really leveraging what works for you, but also experimenting with other sort of like quote unquote viral formats. But you never know, like something you put in like 10 hours to write a piece could be absolutely trash versus something that you put 5 minutes in. So who knows?
Yeah, that's very true. So when you're talking about recycling, you're not saying repurposing, putting the same content on multiple platforms. You're saying
bring it up again at a later time?
Yeah, you should do both. You should write once, distribute on all the platforms in different mediums, maybe different hooks, whatever it is. But you should also, if it does work, just try it again like next month. Because the good thing about the internet is everybody has a short-term memory. So if it worked before, the probability is high that it'll work again. It might not, but who actually cares? Right? It doesn't really damage anything if you just post the same thing. You still wrote it in the first place.
I'd like to talk a little bit about, you're talking about writing and you're talking about video. What are the pros and cons of both of those approaches?
Writing is great. I've learned a lot just creating content in general. Writing gives you clarity of thought. I think just having to sit down and to communicate something effectively forces these nuggets out versus just riffing off it. But the good thing about video is you're bringing in lots of different disciplines. Like you're thinking about lighting, composition, you have to know the gear. You are learning to storytell, you're learning animations, sound design. There's a lot of good things to learn about video. And I spent probably about a year-ish just after I quit my job. Okay, well, I don't have anything to do. Let me just learn video production. And that was really fun. I think that the good things, just the learnings in general. And then potentially the challenge is video takes a lot of time and it's really expensive as a hobby. Yes, you got to get the lights. You've got to get the camera. You got to get the microphone. Like everything just adds up in terms of cost. But then also it's really time consuming to learn about it and then do it and create this video. I used to spend average 3 hours on a 1 minute edit. It took me that long to get all the sound and all the things. Now I'm a lot quicker, but it just sinks a lot of time in terms of a creative endeavor. I think more cons for video than there are for writing. I think with all these like GPTs out there, it's really easy to just spin something up, right? For video, it's not so easy, although we do see some of these platforms out there. In terms of those two aspects, I think those are the main pros and cons for me. So I want to talk about three things that like the good aspects of content creation. So we just spoke about like the pros and cons of writing and video, but in terms of like actually making stuff and putting it out there. So the first one is obviously opportunities. Everybody always sees those opportunities. You meet people that you would never otherwise meet because you've just opened up your network so much more. There's potential collaboration. There's partnership with brands. Like you could work with a brand that you've always admired that you probably would never get a job there, let's be honest, but that's fine. You can validate a product idea quicker because now you have people that trust you and likes what you're saying. You can just be like, hey guys, what do you think about this? So there are a lot of opportunities that come. And the second thing is you know how to present yourself publicly. I think this one's awesome, right? You get like more comfortable in your own skin, right? And you speak and you write, and that gives you clarity of thought, which I said earlier. And then the third one is because you're online all the time and you're not just consuming, like most people that go on these social media platforms, they are just consumers. Not many of them are creators, but you'll start to notice the folks that are creating stuff. What are they creating? And you'll learn from them. So it is really exciting. It's like another hidden layer of content creation that excites me more. Like I'm not just a consumer. I'm always following the folks that make stuff and you just become a maker. And as a designer, you almost like that's built in. That's why you're a designer. This is just another form and it can be visual. It doesn't have to be visual, but for me, those are like the really good things that I could like bang home about.
For sure. And it's like when you become a UX professional, you never see the world the same way. There's always opportunity to improve, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes you wish you could unsee some of the things that just drive you crazy because now you know they shouldn't exist.
Yep.
So many great tips from Chris there on content creation. My advice to you, don't get overwhelmed. Just pick one platform and start with that. I'm going to wrap up my favorite interviews of 2024 with my mock interview with Steve Jobs. Woo, did we have some fun? Okay, I had some fun. Check it out. It's a good time.
What does Steve Jobs, the co-founder of Apple, think about the state of politics in 2024? The interview starts out pretty interesting, But then stuff gets weird. Let's see what happened. Hi, Steve. Good to see you. So, what do you think about the state of the political landscape right now?
This is America.
Yeah, I totally get that. Do you think everyone around the world has the same problems with politics?
No, every single country has different standards.
That's true. Did you ever think that we would be here today?
It's surreal.
It's surreal? Do you mean how the political campaigns are going? You know, the information shared in them and the mudslinging that's going to be happening from both sides?
There were a few handfuls, but there wasn't any, even a percent of what there is now. It's huge now.
Yeah, I think the ads are going to get worse as the election gets closer.
And this transformation is going to make some people uneasy. People from the PC world, like you and me. It's going to make us uneasy because the PC's taken us a long ways.
Okay, PC. Well, that could go a couple different ways. You could mean a personal computer. You are Steve Jobs. Or you can mean political correctness. But I hear ya. There's going to be some name calling. There's probably going to be some racist and sexist remarks. It's not going to be pretty. It's kind of early days right now.
But when it really starts to happen, I think it's uncomfortable for a lot of people. And because it's change and a lot of vested interests are going to change and it's going to be different. So I think that we're embarked on that. Just because we're competing with somebody doesn't mean we have to be rude.
Well, that's true. What do you think of the former president who is running for president again?
This guy's a son of a bitch liar.
Oh, okay. Tell me how you really feel, Steve.
We've got all the data. We know this.
What do we know?
One is completely open and uncontrolled.
You said one. I think we know who you're referring to. So is it safe to say that you're not a fan of this person?
What happens sometimes, though, is that some people lie. Some people submit an app that they say does one thing, but really does something else.
And by app, I think you mean the application to become president or accept the nomination. Yeah, it does feel a little bit like we're not hearing the whole story. We're just getting sound bites about the narrative that the candidates are trying to get out there.
They try to hide it from us. They get very clever about that. They try to hide it from us, and we find it, and we reject it, and they run to the press, and they tell the press the story about oppression, and it gets written up, and they get their 15 minutes of fame because they hope it will convince us to change our minds, which it never does, but they keep trying to do that. And it's unfortunate, but we take it in the chin. That's part of what we do. And we don't run to the press and go, this guy's a son of a bitch liar. That's just not appropriate for us to do.
You just mentioned the press. Do you think the truth is getting out to the people in the public, Steve?
One of my beliefs very strongly is that any democracy depends on a free, healthy press. And so when I think of the most important journalistic endeavors in this country, I think of things like the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and publications like that. And we all know what's happened to the economics of those businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them are in real trouble. So even more than magazines, I think some of these newspapers are, the news gathering and editorial organizations are really important. I don't want to see us descend into a nation of bloggers myself. I think we need editorial more than ever right now. So anything that we can do to help the New York Times and the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and other news gathering organizations find new ways of expression so that they can afford to get paid, so they can afford to keep their news gathering and editorial operations intact, I'm all for.
So, Steve, you're talking about traditional media, like newspaper articles, political cartoons, and editorials, things like that, right?
Political cartoons got caught in that because by definition, they defame people.
Right.
So we didn't think of that. That was an unintended consequence of a rule that said you can't defame people.
And do you think there's a lot of defamation going on in politics right now?
We had a rule that said you can't defame other people. You can't defame people.
Sure, that's fair. We talked a lot about politics, Steve. Maybe a little too much. So let me wrap up by asking you, who is going to win the presidential election?
It's complicated. Oh, I have no idea.
Yeah, I hear you. It is complicated. We have a person who was president in the past. Then they lost an election, and now they're running to be president again. Kind of strange right now.
Because nobody's ever done this before.
Well, not quite, Steve. Grover Cleveland is the only former president who has ever come back after being defeated for re-election. And he won a second non-consecutive win.
I absolutely think we could do better.
Oh, yes. I agree. To me, I kind of feel like when a person tries to make a comeback move like this, it's just to feed a big ego.
So I don't see why you have to change if you get big.
I hear you. That makes sense. When people become famous or a powerful leader, sometimes they forget the person that they used to be. They stop being friendly or the respectful person they once were. It's really kind of sad, Steve. Don't you think?
Yes, I understand. And I feel your pain.
So I want to talk about the tech companies for a minute. When it comes to Silicon Valley, are they involved in politics too much? Or maybe not enough?
Most people think not enough.
Oh, you think so? Tell me more about that.
We're doing the best we can. We're making mistakes. We're fixing them as fast as we can.
Are you really?
A lot of people in the Valley think we're really old-fashioned about this.
Yeah, I worry about this stuff too.
And it's pissing us off.
Really? You getting pissed off?
No, Silicon Valley's not monolithic. We've always had a very different view than some of our colleagues in the Valley.
Exactly. Who cares what other people think? It kind of reminds me of a quote. There are all kinds of stupid people that annoy me. But what annoys me the most is a lazy argument.
No, we have wonderful arguments.
Oh, okay. So it sounds like guys in tech are not all bad. You know, one person that comes to mind when I think of a tech bro is Elon Musk. Now, he can't become president since he was not born in the United States, so he's not even eligible to run.
He's a nice enough guy about it.
Oh, okay. So you like Elon Musk? I'm surprised you're calling him a nice guy.
They're doing pretty well, actually, in some ways, and they have some work to do in other ways.
Sure. You know, who isn't guilty of that? I think a lot of people would agree that they could work on themselves a little bit. So I want to wrap up this chat about politics with one more question. Thinking about who might win the 2024 presidential election, and I'd like to think that presidential candidates are not seeking the position just for power. I'm hoping that they're going for this position for good, right?
Yeah, I guess why wouldn't they be is the question.
Because being president of the United States is a leadership role, not a dictatorship. There are multiple branches of government, as you know, and they all have to balance each other out. It's not like one person gets to call all the shots.
The best ideas have to win. So otherwise, good people don't stay.
Sure. I don't really want to think about people leaving the country because of the person who's in power. Kind of a scary thought.
So we have a history of doing that.
Yeah, I know it happens. People get fed up with the government and go to another place to pursue a better life.
I've actually always done a bit of that.
You what? Left the United States? I'd go so far as to say, Steve, that you actually left Earth. You died in 2011, remember?
There are
Ashes
holes in some websites, but those holes are getting plugged real fast.
Are you saying that you left Earth through some holes in a website? What? See, what are you talking about?
So I understand that's a
entirely.
problem for some people.
Yeah, that's a little strange for me to wrap my head around. So, Steve, are you suggesting that back in 2011, one way to leave Earth was to exit through holes in websites?
Oh, in its day, sure it was.
Okay, yeah, well, that's interesting. So, let me ask you, why do you think that some people leave this Earth differently? Why was it different for you?
They said because I bleed in 6 colors.
You bleed 6 colors? Oh, wow. Okay, I didn't see that coming.
We're extraordinarily diligent and extraordinarily transparent about it.
Okay, Steve, if you say so, we're going to move on now. See, I told you that things got pretty weird. Just wait till the next installment of this interview. There's more weird stuff to come. Now, this is not an AI generated video. This is a video with a little bit of clever editing and creative license. Obviously, we lost Steve years ago, and I'm creating this video with all the love and admiration that Steve Jobs deserves. Oh, and one more thing. If you like this interview, subscribe to BlatzChatz because there's more to come. Thank you for indulging me on revisiting some of my favorite interview moments in 2024. What should I talk about next year? Leave me a comment and let me know what topics BlatzChatz should cover in the new year. Thanks for watching.
Check out all my interviews with industry leaders on BlatzChatz.